Okay, so let's go ahead and look at those like specific requirements and then what I would do for each of them. Okay, so let's say you are asked for a 50-word bio and it's a formal context, so like an application or something like that, where it's going to go out into the world and you want to look professional. I would say, okay, 3 or 4 puzzle pieces. Let's try going with the 4 puzzle piece route, which means, again, we might want to stick with those factual puzzle pieces. So here they are as a little puzzle. Okay, so first, name what you do where you're based. Again, doesn't have to be in this order, but let's just try it out. Mary Simmons is a flutist and composer based in Washington, D.C., and these are fictional people, by the way. Education training, she received a DMA from the Catholic University of America in 2012. Accomplishments, again, just pulling from her commissions section of her resume, which she feels the most accomplished by and the most proud of. She says her works have been commissioned by orchestras like the Fort Worth Symphony Orchestra and the Grant Park Orchestra in Chicago. And then current work, she's currently artist in residence at NYU. So that makes for a pretty dry bio, but she did give a couple specific examples. She said specifically what kind of artist she is. She said where she went to get what degree, and when. So she's being as specific as she can within that 50-word limit. And we'll talk a little bit about vagueness, I guess is the word, and how to combat it in a short word limit in our next fictional person example. But she's doing what she can with the word limit that she has, and she does put her most impressive foot forward with the commissions that she's gotten and also her current role at NYU. Now, ideally, she'd be able to go on about that, but she just doesn't have the space. Now, let's say she's given 25 more words. Well, she might decide that she wants to talk more about her current work, because it did sort of sounded like an abrupt ending, just saying she's currently artist in resident at NYU. Fine, but it would be nice to know more about her work in that role. So she says she's currently artist in residence at NYU and will be touring with the NYU orchestras this spring, performing her concerto Wind in the Willows. Great. It's a much nicer ending because it just satisfies the questions that your reader might have, like, oh, artist in residence at NYU, like, oh, what are you doing with that? It sort of answers that lingering question that might be on the reader's mind and kind of feels more final because of that. But the same other than that. All right, so there's those two side by side. And just to reiterate, these are paragraphs that you're writing. When I'm giving the examples, it's like line by line, but I want to make sure they're like a paragraph format. All right, so let's say you get 100 words to work with, and now it's going to feel nice and roomy after reading those two. So let's choose 5 puzzle pieces, which means let's stick with those factual ones, and then let's add in the influences and inspirations puzzle piece. I'm going to add it in right here not because that's where it needs to go, they can go in any order, but because I have the benefit of hindsight and I've already written this, and that's where it seemed to flow the best. Now, flow is something that's difficult to explain, but I will try when we look at this example. Same first sentence. Second sentence. Her compositional works draw inspiration from the abstract expressionism of painters like Helen Frankenthaler and capture the immediacy and interconnectedness of material, nature, and human emotion in thin and ever-changing fields of color. Great. Why I feel like this works here and not elsewhere in the bio is because she introduced herself in that first sentence as a flutist and composer. And so that influences sentence helps to narrow that down to, okay, I'm a flutist and composer, but here we're talking about my compositions. This is what I do. And truly, through all the bio examples we've had, she's talking about herself as a composer mostly, although she is going to be performing on that tour. Then she says she received a DMA from Catholic University of America in 2012. Her works have been commissioned, blah, 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 same sentence. And then the same last sentence as that 75-word version as well. All right, so let's say you get all the room in the world, which is in bio land is 150 plus. then let's add in that 6th puzzle piece to see how we might, with still a formal context, add in a personal touch while still sounding formal, but having a little personality and a little flair. So I'm going to put it at the beginning, and it doesn't have to be there, but it works well there just because the personal detail tends to function well as like a catch your attention sort of moment, because it can be interesting, it can be fun, and so it works well in that first spot. I'm also going to change the order a little bit, and I'll show you why here in a minute. All right, so here's her personal detail. Mary Simmons enjoys telling people she once worked as a flutist at Disneyland in her hometown of Anaheim. So here you can already see she's covering some of that second puzzle piece, that red basics puzzle piece, while she's telling her story. So it's doing double duty here. She held the job for one summer after she dropped out of the composition program at UC Santa Barbara. Simmons went on to develop her signature compositional style after she moved to Washington, D.C. in 2008. So this is why the education puzzle piece works better here rather than after influences, because she's already just mentioned Washington, D.C. and that's where she got her degree, right? So it makes, for flow purposes, makes sense that it comes next. The artistic communities of the Catholic University of America, where she received her DMA in 2012, and the Northside Composers Alliance supported her development, but she likes to think her work still possessed some of that Disney magic. Okay, so this is how you make a personal story work in a formal context. You make it cohesive. So we have this story and we're like, okay, but how does this relate to you as an artist, or else I don't care, right? that sounds mean. But if you're just telling me a story and it doesn't have to do with you and what you do, it doesn't belong in your bio. Everything in your bio should relate to you and your life and your artistic life, right? So if it's just a story about your childhood, you need to make sure to tie it in, or how you got interested in art. It needs to tie in directly to something else in the bio. So this is how she's doing that. And then we're going to go on to the same influences sentence, the same accomplishment sentence, and then same final current work sentence. All right, so here it is as a complete paragraph. It ended up being 177 words. So if you had a 150 word limit, it would be pretty easy to cut down like the orange section, the education section a little bit. I think cut that back down. That would be pretty easy to do. So you could trim this and still have that nice flavor to it. So hopefully that ordering makes sense why I chose that. But again, it's not a rule. You could, even with Mary Simmons, even with this example, rearrange it and it would still be correct. But that's just how I chose to order it for flow purposes. All right, so now that we're going to look at that other, we're going to look at another 50-word bio for the same person, Mary Simmons, but we're going to say, okay, let's say it's an informal audience. How could I write a bio that's more interesting than that first 50-word bio you presented that was boring, but it did the work it needed to do, right? So let's say you have an informal audience though, and you don't necessarily need to do that work. So maybe it's going to be shared on social media, or maybe it's for a website, or maybe it's just, you know, you're presenting a work for at a school for children, and you're like, they don't care what degree I have or what museums I've been included in or whatever. They don't care about that. But they do care about, you know, that I worked at Disney, right? That's cool. So you might choose to talk more about that than talk about, you know, your resume line items or your degrees. All right, so let's try doing personal detail, name, influences, and see if it works. Same sort of start, but I sort of meshed them all together. So Mary Simmons enjoys telling people she once worked as a flutist at Disneyland. She held the job for one summer before moving to Washington, D.C., where she developed a compositional style, combining abstract expressionism and Disney magic and exploring the interconnectedness of material nature, blah, 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 blah. So it has the same flavor as that really long bio, but is very short, right? Very brief. Now it doesn't do the work it needs to do for a formal context. I want to say that again, because I want to make sure you don't send this in with an application, because they are going to want to see career highlights. They are going to want to see your education in your bio, but it works really well for certain informal contexts. All right, another way of doing it, maybe Mary she's a new artist and she doesn't want to put a line for her experience or her accomplishments. She'd rather talk about her influences. So she's a flutist and composer. Her compositional works draw from abstract expressionism. She's currently artist in residence at NYU. This is also a great pattern if you don't have, so maybe you're a new artist and you also don't have a formal arts education. This is a great order to go in. So keep that in mind as well. All right, now we're going to go to another fictional person, and we're going to talk about how to make 50 words more interesting while still covering the factual puzzle pieces and not straying into the fancy ones. All right, so this is a very boring, very dry bio. John Jones was raised in Austin, Texas, and received his MFA from the University of Texas at Austin. He has exhibited paintings. Let me change my view here. Maybe not. In a dozen group shows and 5 solo shows across the United States and Mexico. He currently lives in Houston and teaches painting at Rice University. That does the work, right? That does those 4 verse puzzle pieces, but it could be better. And I say that because it could be more specific while still using 50 words. Just because you have 50 words doesn't mean you can't still say more specific things about yourself. So this is a little vague, and for that reason, it's a little drier than it has to be. So here's another 50 words. John Jones is an Irish abstract painter based in Texas. For me, it's more important that he's an Irish abstract painter than that he lives in Austin. He holds an MFA in studio art from the University of Texas at Austin, so I was able to put in what his degree is in. He is inspired by Irish folklore and biodiversity, and his paintings have been featured in galleries across the United States and Mexico. So for me, it doesn't matter as much how many shows he's been in, because that's going to be shown in his resume. And so if we don't say those numbers, we actually have room for that, for one of those fancy puzzle pieces, which is his influences. And now we know he's Irish, and he's also inspired by Irish folklore, so there's some personal significance there for him as well. John teaches painting at Rice University, so ends the same way. So that's, a similar length, maybe a couple words longer, but so much more interesting and tells us so much more about John as an artist than the first version. So I'd say when you draft your first version, maybe say, okay, how can I trim this down and say the same thing? And then see if you have some extra room to add a little bit more personality in while staying under the word limit.